There was a door on the 3rd floor of the Hayes estate. Heavy oak, iron hinges, 0 keyholes. The staff's rule was simple. You don't look at it, you don't walk past it, and you certainly never open it. Rumours claimed the boss kept his monsters in there. They were half right. When the newest maid finally pushed that door open, she didn't find a monster. She found the city's most ruthless crime lord, bleeding out on the hardwood. And that was the night everything changed. Nora did not take the job at the Hayes estate because she had a death wish. She took it because rent was due, her bank account was hovering in the single digits, and the agency paid in cash. Crisp, unmarked $100 bills handed out in a plain manila envelope every Friday afternoon. The orientation lasted exactly 4 minutes. Mrs. Gable, a woman carved from granite and smelling faintly of bleach and stale peppermints, walked Nora through the sprawling, cold expanse of the 1st floor. "You clean what is dirty. You ignore what is broken," Mrs. Gable said, her voice a flat, dead monotone. "If you see a stain on a rug that wasn't there yesterday, you use the heavy-duty enzyme cleaner in the hall closet. You do not ask what spilled. If you find a weapon, you do not touch it. You place a fresh towel over it and leave the room. You do not speak to Mr. Hayes. You do not look Mr. Hayes in the eye. And above all else, you do not go near the east wing of the 3rd floor." Nora had nodded. She wasn't an idiot. You didn't grow up in the South Side without learning how to mind your own business. She knew who Declan Hayes was. Everyone in the city knew. He was the man who owned the docks, the unions, and half of the police force. He was a phantom who operated in the spaces between legitimate commerce and absolute brutality. For the first 3 weeks, the job was exactly as advertised. Hard, mindless labor. The estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Bulletproof glass on the windows, cameras tucked into the crown molding, men in sharp suits with unmistakable bulges under their left arms loitering in the driveway, smoking cigarettes and speaking in low, clipped tones. Nora kept her head down. She scrubbed imported Italian marble until her knuckles cracked. She vacuumed Persian rugs, thick enough to swallow a shoe. She cleaned up the aftermath of the life Declan Hayes led. She never saw violence, only the echoes of it. A smashed crystal decanter in the study. Drops of dark, dried crimson leading from the garage to the basement door. The smell of sweat, fear, and ozone lingering in the billiards room after a late-night meeting. Nora erased it all. She was a ghost cleaning up after ghouls. She saw Declan Hayes exactly twice from a distance. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a decade. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nora would make in 5 years. His face was sharp, handsome in a harsh, unforgiving way, but his eyes were flat, dead. Like a wet street at 3 in the morning. When he walked into a room, the temperature seemed to drop. The heavily armed men who worked for him stood a little straighter. They stopped breathing so loudly. They were terrified of him. Nora didn't care. As long as the manila envelope appeared on Fridays, Declan Hayes could be the devil himself. The rule about the 3rd floor, however, hung over the staff like a guillotine. The east wing was a dead zone. No cleaning carts were allowed past the landing. No dusters, no vacuums. Mrs. Gable handled the immediate hallway herself. The oak door at the very end of the corridor remained shut, locked, and silent. The other maids whispered in the laundry room when Mrs. Gable wasn't around. "It's an interrogation room," a girl named Sarah muttered one afternoon, folding heavy linen towels. My cousin used to run with the O'Connor crew. He said Hayes keeps a soundproof room, tiled floors, drains in the center, for the people who don't pay up. "I heard it's a vault," another maid countered. Cash, gold, ledgers. That's why he doesn't let anyone near it. Nora said nothing. She sprayed starch on a collar and pressed the iron down hard. It didn't matter what was behind the door. Interrogation room, vault, or a shrine to a dead mother. It wasn't her business. Curiosity killed the cat. But in this house, curiosity would likely get you stuffed in a 50-gallon drum and dropped off the pier. But as the days bled into weeks, Nora began to notice the cracks in the fortress. She noticed that the men in suits were whispering more. She noticed that Declan's underboss, a vicious, slick-haired man named Tommy, was spending more time in the main house, his eyes darting around like a rat looking for cheese. There was a tension in the air, thick and metallic, like the static before a lightning strike. Something was wrong in the Hayes syndicate, and Declan Hayes was appearing less and less. He stopped coming down to the dining room for his black coffee and dry toast. His study remained empty. The heavy tread of his boots on the hardwood floors vanished. "Boss is working out of the city," Tommy told the guards one morning in the kitchen. Nora was wiping down the counter, invisible to them. Tommy poured a cup of coffee, his hand shaking slightly. "He's making a push on the Northern Territory. I'm handling things here until he gets back." Nora kept scrubbing. She knew a lie when she heard one. She had seen Declan Hayes's reflection in the hallway mirror just 12 hours earlier. He wasn't out of the city. He was upstairs, and he looked like a corpse walking. His skin had been grey, a terrible ashen colour. He had been favouring his left side, leaning heavily against the banister when he thought no one was looking. Nora had been tucked into the alcove, polishing a silver vase. She had held her breath until her lungs burned, pressing herself into the shadows. He had paused, his chest heaving, a sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. Then, gritting his teeth, he had dragged himself up the stairs. Toward the 3rd floor, toward the oak door. Nora hadn't told anyone, not Sarah, not Mrs. Gable. In this world, knowledge was dangerous. If the boss was hurt, and he was hiding it from his own men, it meant he didn't trust them. It meant weakness was a death sentence. If Tommy knew Declan was injured, Tommy wouldn't be drinking coffee in the kitchen. He would be staging a coup. Nora wrung out her sponge. Let the wolves eat each other, she thought. She just needed Friday to come. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. It wasn't a gentle, romantic rain. It was a vicious, howling nor'easter that battered the coast, throwing sheets of freezing water against the bulletproof windows of the estate. The wind shrieked through the ancient trees lining the driveway, shaking the glass in its frames. It was 2 a.m. Nora was working late. A pipe had backed up in the 2nd-floor guest bathrooms, flooding 3 rooms before the night watchman noticed. Mrs. Gable had woken Nora up, handed her a mop, and pointed up the stairs. Extra pay, cash in hand. Nora didn't refuse. The house was eerily silent beneath the roar of the storm outside. Most of the guards were in the basement barracks or patrolling the perimeter in SUVs. Tommy and his crew had left hours ago. The main house was a tomb. Nora was exhausted. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from the industrial bleach, and her cheap sneakers squelched with dirty water. She wrung the mop into the heavy yellow bucket, the mechanical squeak echoing loudly in the empty marble hallway. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, preparing to haul the bucket down the stairs. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through the thunder. Thud. It was heavy, dense, and muffled. It came from directly above her. The 3rd floor, Nora froze. Her hands tightened on the plastic handle of the mop. She stared up at the grand, sweeping staircase. The shadows up there were thick, undisturbed. Just the wind, she told herself. A branch hitting the roof. Ignore it. You clean what is dirty. You ignore what is broken. She grabbed the handle of the bucket. Crash. This time it wasn't a thud. It was the sharp, unmistakable sound of glass shattering, followed by a low, guttural groan. It wasn't a monster. It was a man, and he sounded like he was dying. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Her breath hitched in her throat. The smart play, the only play, was to walk away. Go downstairs. Go to sleep. Wake up tomorrow, collect her money, and live another day. But the groan came again. Weaker this time, desperate. Nora closed her eyes. She cursed her mother for raising her with a conscience. She cursed the storm for waking her up. Most of all, she cursed the manila envelope full of cash that kept her tied to this house of horrors. Leaving the mop and bucket, she crept toward the stairs. She didn't turn on any lights. The frequent flashes of lightning illuminated her path, casting long, skeletal shadows across the walls. She reached the third-floor landing. The air up here felt different, stagnant, cold. She looked down the long corridor of the east wing. The oak door sat at the very end, a solid block of darkness. Nora walked slowly, the squelch of her sneakers painfully loud in her own ears. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. He keeps his monsters in there. It's an interrogation room. As she closed the distance, the smell hit her. It wasn't the smell of bleach or lemon polish. It was heavy, metallic, and sickeningly sweet. Copper. Blood. She reached the door. Another flash of lightning lit the hallway. A thick, dark smear seeped from beneath the heavy oak, pooling on the polished floorboards. Nora stared at it. Her throat went dry. If she opened the door, she crossed a line she could never uncross. If she saw what was inside, she couldn't unknow it. She would become a liability, and liabilities in the Hayes Syndicate were buried in the foundations of new high-rises. She reached out. Her hand trembled as her fingers brushed the cold iron handle. There was no lock, no keypad. The heavy door yielded to her push. It swung inward on silent hinges. Nora stepped inside. It wasn't a torture chamber. It wasn't a vault. It was a trauma room. The walls were painted a sterile, jarring white. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh, unyielding glare. There were stainless steel counters lined with medical supplies, oxygen tanks, an EKG machine, and a reinforced hospital bed in the center of the room. The glass cabinet containing bandages and vials had been smashed. Shards glittered on the tile floor like ice, and lying in the center of the wreckage, his back propped against the base of the metal cabinets, was Declan Hayes. He was stripped to the waist, though stripped was a loose term. His chest and abdomen were a mess of blood-soaked gauze and medical tape. The white tiles beneath him were slick with fresh crimson. He was struggling to breathe, his chest hitching violently with every intake of air. In his trembling right hand, resting on his knee, was a heavy, black, semi-automatic pistol. The barrel was pointed directly at Nora's chest. Nora froze. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't scream. She just looked down the barrel of the gun and then up into the eyes of the man holding it. His eyes weren't dead anymore. They were wide, feverish, and wild with pain. He looked at her not as a maid, but as a threat. "Give me one reason," Declan choked out. His voice was a rasp, stripped of its usual terrifying authority. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and spat a glob of blood onto the floor. "One reason I don't put a hole in you right now?" Nora's knees felt like water, but she locked them. She looked at the blood pooling around him. She looked at the way his arm shook, holding the weapon. "Because," Nora said, her voice surprisingly steady, If you pull that trigger, the recoil will probably tear whatever is left of your insides wide open, and I'm the only one in the house right now who isn't trying to take your job." Declan stared at her. The harsh, fluorescent light highlighted the deep grooves of agony around his mouth. For a long second, the heavy silence of the room was broken only by the storm lashing against the windows and his ragged breathing. Then slowly the gun wavered. The muzzle dropped a few inches. "Shut the door," Declan whispered, his head lolling back against the metal cabinet. "Lock it." Nora stepped fully into the room. She pushed the heavy oak door shut until it clicked. She slid the massive iron deadbolt into place. She turned back to the most dangerous man in the city. He had dropped the gun. It lay on the bloody tiles. His eyes were closed. "Are you dying?" Nora asked. "Working on it," he muttered. "Come here." Nora didn't move. "I'm a maid. I clean floors. I don't do—" She gestured vaguely at the massacre of his torso. Declan opened his eyes. The feverish haze was momentarily pierced by the sheer, imposing willpower that made him a boss. "You're in the room," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravel. "That makes you my doctor tonight, or it makes you a witness. You don't want to be a witness. Get over here." Nora swallowed hard. She walked across the glass-strewn floor, her sneakers leaving bloody footprints. Up close, the damage was horrifying. It wasn't a fresh wound. It was an old one that had gone spectacularly wrong. The thick layers of gauze covering his left side were soaked through, blackish red and smelling of infection. "Bullet?" Nora asked, kneeling beside him. 4 days ago, Declan rasped. Southside Port. Deal went sideways. "Why aren't you in a hospital? Why isn't a doctor here?" Declan laughed. It was a terrible, jagged sound that ended in a cough. "If I go to a hospital, I have to report a gunshot wound. The cops get involved. The feds get involved. If I bring my doctor here, Tommy finds out I took a hit. If Tommy knows I'm weak—" He winced, gritting his teeth as a spasm of pain rolled through him. "Tommy makes a move. The whole family goes to war. I bleed out here. It's just me who dies. War starts. 50 people die by tomorrow night." Nora stared at him. The sheer, terrifying logic of his world laid bare. He was dying in a secret room in his own house because trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "I tried to change the packing," Declan whispered, his eyes sliding shut again. "Slipped. Tore the stitches. It's bleeding again. You have to pack it." "I don't know how to do that," Nora said, panic finally beginning to edge into her voice. "I'll kill you. I'm already dead if you don't," he countered. He forced his eyes open and pointed a shaking finger at the stainless steel counter. "Quick clot gauze, yellow package, medical stapler, blue handle, antiseptic wash. Get them." Nora scrambled up. She didn't think. She just moved. She found the yellow packages. She found the stapler. She found a large bottle of betadine. She brought them back to the floor, kneeling in the pool of his blood. "Take the old dressing off," he commanded. Nora hesitated. "It's going to hurt." "I know." She grasped the edge of the blood-soaked tape. She pulled. Declan's back arched off the cabinets. A sound tore from his throat, a muffled, animalistic grunt of pure agony. His hand shot out, grabbing Nora's wrist with a grip like a steel vice. His knuckles were white. "Keep going," he ground out, sweat pouring down his face. Nora peeled the heavy dressing away. The smell of copper intensified, mixing with the foul odor of necrotic tissue. The wound was a jagged hole in his side, inflamed and angry. Blood was welling up from inside it, thick and fast. He had indeed ripped the internal stitches. "Wash it," he ordered. Nora unscrewed the betadine. She poured it directly into the wound. Declan's grip on her wrist tightened so hard she thought the bones would snap. He didn't scream, but he bit down on his own lip until it bled. Now the gauze. Pack it in. Deep. Declan, I can't. Do it, he snarled, the Mafia boss suddenly surging to the surface, terrifying and absolute. Nora ripped open the yellow package. Her hands were shaking violently. She took the long strip of chemically treated gauze, pressed her fingers together, and shoved it directly into the bullet hole. Declan convulsed. His head slammed back against the cabinet. His eyes rolled back. Nora kept pushing. She packed the wound tight, her fingers slipping in his blood. I'm sorry, she kept muttering, an automatic mantra. More, he gasped, barely conscious. She finished the first package. She ripped open a second. She packed that one in, too. The bleeding finally began to slow, the chemicals in the gauze doing their brutal work. Staple it, he breathed. Nora picked up the blue medical stapler. It looked like something from a hardware store. She pinched the torn edges of his skin together. Clack. A metal staple pierced his flesh. Clack. 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 She put 6 staples into his side. When she finished, her hands dropped to her lap. She sat back on her heels, gasping for air as if she had been the one shot. Declan was completely still. His chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid pants. The bleeding had stopped. Nora sat on the floor of the secret room, her cheap canvas sneakers ruined, her hands stained red. The thunder outside cracked, rattling the floorboards. She looked at the man on the floor. He wasn't the terrifying spectre of the Hayes family right now. He was just a man broken down to meat and bone, relying on a maid making minimum wage to keep him alive. Minutes ticked by. The silence stretched. Slowly, Declan opened his eyes. The fever was still there, but the immediate, sharp agony had dulled. He looked at Nora. Really looked at her. He took in her cheap clothes, her terrified but set jaw, and her bloody hands. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Nora," she said. "You did good, Nora." "I need bleach," she replied, her mind desperately retreating to the safety of her job. "For the floor. It's going to stain the grout if I don't get it now." A faint, hollow chuckle escaped Declan's lips. "You're worried about the floor." "I clean what is dirty," she recited, staring numbly at her hands. "You're not a maid anymore, Nora," Declan said. He shifted slightly, grimacing. "You know the layout of this room. You know I'm compromised. You know my blood type." He gestured to the empty IV bags in the trash. "You're in it now." "I don't want to be in it," Nora snapped, a flare of anger breaking through her shock. "I just want my envelope on Friday. I won't say a word to anyone. Not Tommy, not Mrs. Gable. I'll clean this up and I'll go back downstairs." Declan watched her. His eyes were dark, calculating despite the pain. The apex predator assessing a new variable in his territory. "Tommy is getting bold," Declan said quietly, speaking more to himself than to her. He thinks I'm rotting in a hotel somewhere. If he smells blood in the water, he'll make a play. I can't leave this room. Not for a few days." He looked back at her. "I need someone to be my eyes downstairs. I need someone to bring me supplies. Water. Antibiotics from the safe downstairs." "No," Nora said, shaking her head, backing away across the bloody tiles. "Absolutely not. I am not getting involved in a mob war. I fold towels. I vacuum." Declan reached out, his large, blood-stained hand wrapped around the black pistol still lying on the floor. He didn't point it at her, but he rested his hand on it. "You're already involved," he stated flatly. "You saved my life. In my world, that makes you mine. It makes you a target." He paused, letting the weight of the reality settle over her. Tommy isn't stupid. He'll notice the missing supplies. He'll notice the blood stain you're going to scrub out of the hallway carpet. If he catches you, he won't fire you. He'll put a drill through your kneecaps until you tell him what's behind this door. Nora stopped moving. A cold dread, far worse than the fear of the gun, settled into her stomach. "I can protect you," Declan said, "but only if you do exactly what I tell you." Nora looked at the blood on the floor. She looked at the man who commanded an empire, currently trapped in a white room. She had walked through the oak door to save a dying man. She had just made a deal with the devil. "What do you need me to do?" Nora asked. Declan's lips twitched into a shadow of a smile. It didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "First," he said, "you're going to clean this floor." The smell of bleach didn't erase the memory of the blood, but it did a hell of a job burning it out of Nora's sinuses. She spent the remaining 3 hours of her shift scrubbing the third-floor hallway on her hands and knees. She used a heavy-duty bristle brush and undiluted chemical cleaner, attacking the dark smear on the floorboards until her muscles screamed and her knuckles were cracked and bleeding. She didn't sleep. By 6 in the morning, the storm had broken, leaving behind a bruised grey sky. Nora changed into a fresh grey uniform in the staff locker room. Her reflection in the mirror looked hollowed out. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. She splashed cold water on her face, slapped her cheeks until some colour returned, and walked into the kitchen to pour coffee. The house was waking up, and the tension was a physical weight in the air. "You look like hell," Sarah muttered, dropping a crate of fresh produce on the stainless steel island. "Guest bathrooms flooded on the second floor," Nora lied smoothly. It was a half-truth. "Mrs. Gable had me up at 2 dragging a mop." Sarah pulled a face. "Better you than me. The suits are in a mood today." She wasn't wrong. The guards standing by the back door weren't making their usual crude jokes. They were checking their phones incessantly, their hands resting heavy on their belts. At 7:30, Tommy walked in. He didn't look like a mobster from the movies. He looked like a mid-level investment banker who did too much cocaine. He wore a sharp navy suit, his dark hair slicked back tightly against his skull. But it was his eyes that gave him away, restless, entirely devoid of empathy, darting around the room like a hawk looking for a field mouse. He poured himself coffee. He didn't look at Nora or Sarah. "Where's Gable?" Tommy asked the room at large, checking the inventory in the cellar. "Mr. Lombardi," a guard answered quickly. "Go get her. Tell her I want the master keys. I'm doing a sweep of the property." Tommy took a slow sip of his coffee. "Boss left some sensitive documents behind. I need to secure them." Nora kept her back turned, wiping down a spotless counter. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A sweep of the property. If Tommy took the master keys, he would eventually make his way to the east wing, and the deadbolt on the inside of the oak door wouldn't stop him from calling a few guys with crowbars to open it. Declan had given her exactly one instruction before she left him in the trauma room. The floor safe in the study, under the Persian rug. Code is 4 to 9, 1 at 1. Get the Kipro and the spare burner phone. If I don't get the antibiotics today, the infection will kill me before Tommy gets the chance. She had to move now, while Tommy was occupied in the kitchen. Nora dropped her rag into the sink. She grabbed her cleaning caddy, loading it with glass cleaner and a fresh roll of paper towels. She walked out of the kitchen, forcing her pace to remain steady, completely ordinary. Just a maid doing her job. The main corridor was empty. She slipped into Declan's study. It was a masculine, imposing room. Dark mahogany, leather-bound books, the faint smell of cigar smoke. Nora locked the heavy double doors behind her. She moved quickly to the center of the room, dragging the edge of the heavy Persian rug back. The brass dial of a floor safe stared up at her. Her hands were shaking. She forced herself to breathe. 4, 9, 1, 1. She spun the dial. A heavy mechanical click echoed in the quiet room. She grabbed the handle and hauled the heavy steel door open. Inside sat stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. More money than Nora had ever seen in her life. She ignored it. Tucked in the back corner was a plastic orange pill bottle and a cheap plastic flip phone. She grabbed both, shoved them deep into the front pocket of her apron, and slammed the safe shut. She kicked the rug back into place just as the handle of the study door rattled. Nora froze. "Hey!" A heavy, muffled voice called from the hallway. "Who's in there?" Nora grabbed her bottle of glass cleaner. She sprayed the massive bay window and started wiping vigorously. "Just me," Nora called back, unlocking the door and pulling it open. A massive guard in a cheap suit stared down at her, his hand resting on his holster. He looked past her, scanning the empty room. "Mrs. Gable said no one cleans the study without authorization." "Spilled coffee," Nora lied, her face entirely blank. "Mr. Lombardi said to get it before it stained the wood." "Should I tell him you stopped me?" The guard frowned, his tiny eyes narrowing. He didn't want to bring anything up to Tommy if he didn't have to. "Just finish and get out." "Yes, sir," Nora said. She walked past him, the pill bottle a heavy, damning weight against her thigh. She had the medicine. Now she just had to find a way to get it to the 3rd floor without being seen. The estate was a labyrinth of routines. To survive it, you had to know the blind spots. Nora knew that at 11 a.m., the guards changed shifts, congregating in the basement for 15 minutes. She knew Mrs. Gable took a 15-minute tea break in her office at exactly 11:15 a.m. That gave Nora a very narrow window to become a ghost. She filled a mop bucket with hot water and pine cleaner, carrying it up the back servant stairs. The heavy oak door at the end of the east wing looked completely innocuous in the daylight. Nora tapped twice, waited a beat, and tapped once more. The heavy iron deadbolt slid back with a metallic scrape. Nora pushed the door open and slipped inside, locking it immediately behind her. The trauma room smelled worse today. The sharp tang of bleach from the hallway couldn't mask the heavy, sweet rot of infected flesh inside. Declan was sitting up, but just barely. He was slumped against the wall, a fresh towel pressed against his side. His skin was no longer ashen, it was flushed a deep, terrifying red. Sweat dripped from his hairline, soaking the waistband of his dark trousers. His eyes were glassy and unfocused when he looked up at her. "You made it," he rasped, his voice barely more than a dry wheeze. "I got them," Nora said, dropping her caddy. She pulled the pill bottle and the phone from her apron. She tossed the phone onto the metal counter and cracked the bottle open. She shook 2 heavy white pills into her palm and grabbed a bottled water from the supply shelf. She knelt beside him. "Take these." Declan's hand shook violently as he reached for the pills. He fumbled them. They clattered onto the bloody tile. "Damn it!" he hissed, a flare of helpless rage lighting up his feverish eyes. He tried to lean forward to pick them up, and a sudden, violent spasm racked his entire body. He choked, falling back against the wall, his jaw locked in agony. Nora didn't hesitate. She picked the pills up, dusted them off on her apron, and pressed them directly into his palm. She brought the water bottle to his lips. "Drink," she ordered. He swallowed the pills, gagging slightly on the water. His head lolled back against the tiles. The terrifying aura of the untouchable mob boss was completely stripped away. He was just a body failing its occupant. "Tommy?" Declan asked, his eyes closed. "Downstairs. He's looking for keys. He wants to do a sweep of the property." Declan cursed, a long, breathless string of profanities. He knows I'm not in a hotel. He's probing the perimeter, looking for the weak spot. Your fever is too high, Nora said, ignoring the Mafia politics. She pressed the back of her hand against his forehead. He was radiating heat like a furnace. The pills take time to work. We need to get your core temperature down, or your brain is going to fry before Tommy even finds you. Ice, Declan muttered, shivering violently despite the heat radiating from his skin. I can't bring ice up here. It's too suspicious. Nora looked around the room. She grabbed a stack of clean cotton towels and dragged the mop bucket closer. She plunged the towels into the pine-scented water, wrung them out, and moved back to him. This is going to be cold, she warned. She pressed the wet towel against the back of his neck. Declan hissed, his eyes flying open, but he didn't pull away. She took another towel and dragged it across his bare chest, avoiding the heavy bandages covering his left side. He was covered in scars, a ragged white slice across his collarbone, two perfectly round, puckered marks on his right shoulder, a long, jagged burn down his ribs. This wasn't a man who directed violence from an ivory tower. He had been built by it. "Why are you still here?" Declan asked suddenly. His voice was clearer, the cold water dragging him back to reality. Nora paused, the wet towel resting against his collarbone. She looked down at him. "Because I need the money," she said bluntly. "And because if I run, Tommy will find me and ask why I ran. And I don't know how to withstand a drill to the kneecaps." Declan watched her, his dark eyes tracking every micro-expression on her face. A slow, exhausted smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Honesty," he whispered. "I haven't heard that in a long time." "Don't get used to it," Nora said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I'm keeping you alive because you are my only shield. If Tommy takes over, I'm a loose end. You owe me." "I owe you my life," Declan corrected quietly. "In my family, that is a blood debt. It doesn't wash off. I don't want a blood debt. I want my manila envelope on Friday, and I want to pretend none of this ever happened." Declan closed his eyes, the shivering slowing down as the cold towels did their work. "You're in the game now, Nora. You don't get to pretend anymore." He pointed a weak finger at the burner phone on the counter. "Turn it on. There's one number programmed in. Text it. Tell them the shipment is rotting at the docks." "What does that mean?" "It means my heavy hitters need to come home," Declan said, his voice hardening with an undercurrent of steel. "It's time to go to war." By Thursday afternoon, the Hayes estate felt like a powder keg waiting for a match. The burner phone text had gone through, but Declan hadn't received a response. He was pacing the trauma room now, slowly, painfully, dragging his left leg. But he was moving. The antibiotics had broken the worst of the fever, leaving him hollowed out, but deeply, lethally focused. Downstairs, the atmosphere was suffocating. Tommy had brought in more men. Strangers with flat eyes and thick necks, wearing leather jackets that didn't hide the weapons they carried. They were positioned at the doors, the gates, the bottom of the stairs. Mrs. Gable was frantic, barking orders at the staff to stay out of the way. Nora was polishing the banister on the second floor when she felt the shift in the air. Heavy footsteps pounded up the marble stairs. She didn't look up, keeping her head down, her rag moving in tight, rhythmic circles over the polished wood. A hand slammed down on the banister, inches from her fingers. Nora stopped. She looked up into the smiling, dead eyes of Tommy Lombardi. "You're a hard worker," Tommy said. He smelled like expensive cologne and stale cigarette smoke. He didn't move his hand, forcing Nora to stand perfectly still. "I try, sir," Nora said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Gable says you're new." 3 weeks? "Yes, sir." Tommy leaned in slightly. His gaze swept over her face, looking for a twitch, a drop of sweat. Anything. Funny thing happened today. I was doing inventory on the medical supplies in the basement. We're missing a box of quick clot and a medical stapler. And my guys swear they saw someone messing around in the study yesterday morning. Nora's stomach plummeted into her shoes, but years of surviving the South Side kept her face remarkably blank. She forced her eyes to widen slightly, injecting just the right amount of fear into her voice. I cleaned the study yesterday morning, sir. There was a coffee spill. I don't know anything about medical supplies. I'm just a maid, Tommy repeated softly. He reached out and caught a strand of her hair, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. Nora's skin crawled, but she didn't pull away. If she pulled away, she was dead. See, I think there's a rat in this house. I think someone is hiding something from me, and I don't like secrets. I don't have any secrets, Mr. Lombardi. I just want to do my job. Tommy stared at her for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical pressure on Nora's chest. Then, abruptly, he let go of her hair and smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Good, because if I find the rat, I'm going to skin them alive in the courtyard. He patted the banister. Keep up the good work, sweetheart. He turned and walked down the hall, flanked by 2 of his heavy hitters. Nora waited until he turned the corner before she let out a shaky breath. Her legs felt like water. She gripped the banister to keep from collapsing. Tommy was circling. He knew something was wrong. It was only a matter of time before he kicked in the door on the 3rd floor. She abandoned her cleaning caddy and made her way up the back stairs. She checked the corridor 3 times before slipping into the trauma room. Declan was sitting on the edge of the metal examination table, wiping down the disassembled parts of his black semi-automatic pistol with a rag. He looked up sharply as she locked the deadbolt. "He knows," Nora said, her voice finally shaking. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving cold terror in its wake. "Tommy just cornered me. He knows the medical supplies are missing. He's looking for a rat." Declan didn't flinch. He just calmly snapped the slide back onto the frame of his gun, racking it once. The metallic clack-clack was deafening in the quiet room. "He's making his move," Declan said. "Tonight. He's consolidating his men in that house. He's going to declare me dead or missing, and take the seat. Then we have to get you out of here," Nora said, moving toward the medical cabinet to grab fresh bandages. "I can get a car around back. During the shift change." "I'm not running from my own house, Nora," Declan said. His voice was soft, but it carried the absolute weight of command. He stood up, wincing slightly, but his posture was straight. The mob boss was fully back. "If I run, I lose the city. I lose the families. I die anyway." "So what do you do?" Nora demanded, spinning around to face him. "You have 1 gun. He has 20 men downstairs. You're bleeding through your shirt." Declan walked toward her. He stopped just inches away. He was massive, casting a long shadow over her. "I don't have 1 gun," Declan said, looking down at her. "I have a vault in the basement. Weapons, cash, ledgers. Everything I need to end Tommy tonight." Nora stared at him, the realization dawning cold and heavy. No, absolutely not. "I can't make it down the stairs and back up without drawing fire," Declan said, his eyes locking onto hers. "But a maid can move through the house. A maid has keys. You want me to go into a basement full of armed mobsters, open a vault, and smuggle weapons up to you?" Nora laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "I am not a soldier, Declan. I fold your towels." Declan reached out. He didn't grab her with violence. He gently rested his large, calloused hands on her shoulders. The heat of his skin bled through the thin fabric of her uniform. "You haven't been just a maid since you walked through that door, Nora," he said quietly, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. "You lied to Tommy to protect me. You kept me breathing. You are smarter and tougher than half the men I employ." Nora looked up at him. She saw the calculation in his eyes, but she also saw something else. Desperation. Trust. It was a manipulative, terrible combination. "If Tommy finds the vault open," she whispered. "He won't," Declan promised. "I'll give you the code. You bring me the assault rifle and the 2 flashbangs from the top shelf. You drop them in the laundry chute. I'll retrieve them on the 2nd floor." He squeezed her shoulders slightly. "Do this for me, Nora. Bring me the gun. And I swear to you, on my mother's grave, Tommy Lombardi will never look at you again." Nora closed her eyes. She thought of her empty apartment. She thought of the manila envelope. She thought of Tommy's dead eyes and the promise of a drill through her kneecaps. She opened her eyes and met the gaze of the devil she had chosen. "Give me the code," she said. The basement of the Hayes estate smelled of wet concrete, old cardboard, and stored gunpowder. It was a subterranean labyrinth beneath the sprawling mansion, a place where the sun never reached, and the storm outside was reduced to a dull, subterranean vibration. The main lights were kept off, save for a single, flickering fluorescent bulb hanging from a frayed cord above the utility sink. Nora moved through the shadows like a ghost. Her soft-soled cleaning shoes made no sound on the damp floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a violent, metallic rhythm that she was certain everyone in the house could hear. She kept her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her grey uniform, her fingers curled around a small, heavy iron key Declan had slipped into her palm. "The old wine cellar," he had whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Behind the rack of empty oak barrels. Push the 3rd one from the left. The vault isn't locked electronically. It's an old-school mechanical dial. Code 7240. The rifle and the flashbangs are on the top rack. Drop them down the laundry chute in the utility hallway. I'll catch them." Simple in theory. Suicide in practice. As she rounded the corner near the boiler room, the low murmur of voices cut through the hum of the machinery. Nora froze, pressing her back hard against the cold concrete wall. 2 of Tommy's new enforcers stood by the heavy metal fire door leading to the driveway. One of them was lighting a cigarette, the flare of the lighter illuminating the harsh planes of his face. "Lombardi is getting twitchy," the first man muttered, blowing a cloud of grey smoke toward the ceiling. "He thinks the old man is dead, rotting in some ditch upstate. But he won't make a move on the main accounts until he finds the physical ledgers." "Let him look," the second man grunted, scratching the back of his neck. "Hayes is a ghost. You don't survive a hit like the one at the port. The boss is just tying up loose ends." "And the maid?" "Lombardi's keeping an eye on her. Said she's acting too calm. If she steps out of line tonight, she's going in the river." Nora's blood ran cold. Every muscle in her body locked up. She didn't breathe. She counted the seconds in her head, waiting for them to move, waiting for a break in the shadows. The first man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound, and flicked his cigarette butt into a bucket of dirty water. "Come on. Let's check the perimeter gate. I'm freezing." Their heavy boots crunched on the gravel-strewn concrete as they walked away toward the exit. The heavy fire door slammed shut, the echo dying out down the corridor. Nora let out a long, shuddering breath. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely curl her fingers. She couldn't turn back. If she went back upstairs empty-handed, Tommy's men would catch her, and Declan would bleed out in the trauma room while the syndicate tore itself apart. She had crossed the line. There was no middle ground left. She hurried down the dark aisle toward the old wine cellar. The air grew colder. The racks of empty wooden barrels loomed out of the darkness like skeletal ribs. She found the third barrel from the left. She placed both hands against the heavy oak and shoved. It didn't budge at first. She planted her feet, gritted her teeth, and pushed with all her weight. With a low, grinding screech of old wood against stone, the barrel slid backward into the wall, revealing a recessed steel door set deep into the foundation. Nora stepped into the alcove. The mechanical dial stared back at her in the dim light. 7, 2, 4, 0. Her fingers flew across the dial, turning it left, right, with mechanical precision. At the final turn, a heavy, satisfying clack echoed in the small space. She pulled the steel handle. The heavy door swung open. Inside, the vault was a treasure trove of violence. Rows of matte black firearms lined the racks. Heavy bricks of cash sat stacked in neat, brutal rows. But right on the top shelf sat what she needed: a compact, tactical assault rifle wrapped in oilcloth and 2 heavy, cylindrical flashbang grenades. Nora didn't hesitate. She grabbed the rifle, the metal cold and slick in her hands, and tucked the flashbangs into the deep pockets of her apron. She slammed the vault door shut, spun the dial, and dragged the oak barrel back into place. Clutching the weapon under the cover of her oversized Maid smock, she turned and sprinted back toward the utility hallway. The second-floor utility hallway was dark, illuminated only by the pale, sickly light of the storm outside, filtering through the high transom windows. The laundry chute, a wide stainless steel pipe that dropped straight from the upper floors to the basement sorting bins, sat quietly against the wall. Nora slid the metal hatch open. The drop was a vertical tunnel of slick metal. She pulled the assault rifle from beneath her smock. It was heavy, awkward, and smelled strongly of gun oil and steel. She balanced it carefully on the edge of the chute, alongside the 2 heavy flashbangs. "Catch," she whispered into the empty hallway. She let them go. They slid down the metal tube with a muffled, metallic whoosh, disappearing into the dark depths of the house. Nora slammed the hatch shut, just as a heavy footstep echoed from the top of the stairs. "Hey!" Nora froze. Tommy Lombardi stepped around the corner, his hand resting casually inside his jacket, his dark eyes locked onto hers. The smile on his face was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating mask of pure malice. "Working late, sweetheart?" Tommy asked, his voice dripping with false sweetness as he closed the distance between them. Nora forced her shoulders to drop. She kept her expression blank, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Just finishing the laundry rotation, Mr. Lombardi. Mrs. Gable is strict about the schedules." Tommy stopped a few feet away. He smelled of heavy cologne and wet wool. He didn't look at the laundry chute. He looked at Nora's hands, noticing the faint black smudge of gun oil smeared across her right thumb. "You've got a lot of dirt on you for someone who just folds sheets," Tommy said softly. He took another step closer. He raised his hand, his fingers reaching out to touch her cheek. Nora didn't flinch, but every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. Before Tommy's fingers could graze her skin, a sound echoed from the end of the hallway. It wasn't thunder. It was the distinct, heavy, authoritative tread of boots on hardwood, boots that hadn't walked these floors in 4 days. Tommy stopped dead. His hand dropped. He slowly turned his head toward the dark corridor leading to the east wing. From the shadows of the 3rd-floor landing, stepping down into the light of the 2nd-floor hallway, came Declan Hayes. He was pale, his face drawn tight with pain, the left side of his shirt stiff and dark with dried blood. But he stood tall, and in his hands, held with absolute, terrifying calm, was the assault rifle Nora had just sent down to him. The muzzle was pointed directly at Tommy's chest. The silence in the hallway was absolute. Even the raging nor'easter outside seemed to hold its breath. Tommy stared at Declan. The color drained from his face, leaving his slick, tanned skin looking like dirty wax. For a second, the confident, ruthless enforcer looked exactly like what he was. A man who had gambled with his life and realized, a moment too late, that the house always wins. Declan wasn't a pristine action hero. He leaned heavily against the mahogany door frame of the east wing, utilizing it to keep himself upright. His face was a mask of grey exhaustion, his sharp jaw locked tight against the agony radiating from his side. The left half of his crisp white shirt was ruined, plastered to his ribs with fresh, dark blood. But his hands didn't shake. The tactical rifle Nora had sent up the chute was tucked into his shoulder with lethal, terrifying familiarity. "Boss," Tommy choked out. His hands twitched near his hips. He wanted to reach for his jacket, but his brain was calculating the distance, the angle, and the odds. He lost. We thought you were gone. It's been 4 days. The men were getting restless. I was just securing the house, making sure the perimeter was tight. You were looting a corpse, Tommy," Declan said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that cut through the silence like a butcher's knife. It wasn't a shout, but it commanded the entire hallway, heavy with the absolute authority he wielded. You were probing the walls, looking for the basement vault, looking for the ledgers. Tommy swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet space. No, Declan, I swear to God, I was protecting your seat. You forgot one very important rule about my seat, Declan said. Declan, wait. In my house, I don't die until I say I do. Declan didn't hesitate. He didn't offer a grand monologue, a trial, or a second chance. He just pulled the trigger. The deafening roar of gunfire shattered the quiet of the estate. In the enclosed space of the second-floor utility hallway, the noise was catastrophic, a physical blow that rattled Nora's teeth in her skull. The heavy muzzle flash lit up the dark wallpaper in blinding stroboscopic pulses of orange and white. Tommy didn't fly backward like a stuntman in a movie. The heavy-caliber rounds punched through his chest, folding his body inward. He crumpled instantly, his knees giving out as he collapsed into a broken, unmoving heap on the polished floorboards. His blood pooled rapidly, soaking into the antique runner rug Nora had meticulously vacuumed just yesterday. The echoes of the gunfire rolled through the sprawling mansion like thunder. Downstairs, the tense quiet was instantly replaced by chaos. Shouts erupted. Heavy boots scrambled frantically across the marble foyer as Tommy's men realized the ghost they were hunting had teeth. Declan shifted his weight, gritting his teeth as a fresh, violent wave of agony hit him. He lowered the rifle with one hand and used the other to reach into his pocket, pulling out the heavy cylindrical flashbangs. He didn't bother looking down the stairs. He just pulled the pin on the first one and tossed it casually over his shoulder, bouncing it down the grand staircase. He pulled the pin on the second and lobbed it over the oak railing into the open foyer below. "Cover your ears! Open your mouth!" Declan barked at Nora, his voice tight. She dropped to a crouch, clamping her hands hard over her ears, just as the world exploded. Flash. Boom! A blinding, searing white light flooded the stairwell, burning through Nora's tightly shut eyelids. It was immediately followed by a concussive shockwave that physically punched the air out of her lungs and rattled the glass in the bay windows. Shouts of panic turned into groans of profound disorientation echoing from below. The remaining enforcers were scattering, blinded, deafened, and completely stripped of their tactical advantage. Declan let out a long, ragged breath. The adrenaline was leaving him, and gravity was aggressively taking over. He sagged against the wall, dropping the heavy weapon to his side so it hung by its tactical strap. He pressed his palm against his bandages, feeling the hot, wet seep of blood breaking through the staples Nora had painstakingly put in hours ago. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. Nora was standing pressed flat against the floral wallpaper, her chest heaving. She stared at the body of Tommy Lombardi just 6 feet away. The acrid smell of cordite burned the back of her throat, mixing horribly with the heavy, sweet scent of copper. Her ears were ringing with a high, continuous pitch that drowned out the moaning men downstairs. She had never seen someone die before. She had spent weeks erasing the aftermath of this world, wiping away the bloodstains and picking up the shattered glass. Now, the violence had happened right in front of her. She had carried the gun. She had provided the distraction. She was part of it. "You okay?" Declan asked. His voice sounded distant through the ringing in her ears, steady but laced with a rough, undeniable concern. Nora looked from the dead man on the floor up to the crime lord who had just reclaimed his violent empire. Her cheap canvas sneakers were standing in a fine dusting of drywall debris. Her hand still held the faint, dark smears of gun oil from the basement vault. Her life as a quiet, invisible maid who clocked in, clocked out, and minded her own business was dead on the floor alongside Tommy. There was no going back to minimum wage. There was no going back to looking at her shoes when the men in suits walked by. She took a deep breath. The air tasted like gunpowder. She swallowed hard, her jaw setting into a line of absolute, hard-earned resilience that she had forged growing up on the South Side. "I want my envelope on Friday," Nora said, her voice completely steady, anchoring herself in the one tangible thing that still made sense. "And I want hazard pay." A slow, genuine smile broke across Declan's harsh, exhausted face. It transformed him. For the first time since she had found him bleeding out on the third-floor tiles, his eyes weren't guarded, calculating, or dead. They were alive, burning with a fierce, dangerous warmth, assessing the woman standing in front of him not as collateral damage, but as an equal. "You've got it, Nora," Declan said softly. He let the rifle hang and held out his large, calloused, blood-stained hand. "Come on, we have an empire to clean up." Nora looked down at his hand. It was an invitation into the dark. It was a promise of danger, wealth, and a terrifying, unbreakable kind of loyalty. She looked back up into his eyes. She didn't hesitate. She stepped over the pooling blood on the floorboards, reached out, and took it. The storm outside has finally cleared, but the real war for the Hayes Syndicate has only just begun. What happens next behind those heavy oak doors? If this gritty, high-stakes descent into the dark romance underworld kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button if Nora and Declan's dangerous alliance won you over. Share this video with your fellow dark romance fans, and subscribe right now with notifications turned on so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken Declan's hand? Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.